Everyone whispered about her. In lavish circles of champagne toasts and velvet gowns, her name was always spoken in half smiles and sideways glances. Her name was Celeste, daughter of Bernard Langford, tech mogul, real estate tycoon, and one of the wealthiest men on the eastern seaboard. But unlike her two glamorous sisters, Isla, the model, and Vivian, the venture capitalist Celeste was always referred to with one word behind closed doors: unwanted. It wasn't that she was cruel or rude. In fact, she was the gentlest of them all, but to the social elite, kindness didn't matter much. She didn't possess Isla's beauty, Vivian's edge, or their mother's fire. She had pale skin that blushed too easily, thick glasses that slid down her nose, and a soft voice that barely rose above the hum of cocktail parties. Her father never called her ugly, but he didn't need to. His silence did the job. In family portraits, she was always off-center, like a guest rather than a daughter. Then came Daniel. Daniel Hart was everything the Langfords were not. He was self-made, honest, and driven by things far deeper than money. He grew up in a modest town, fixing engines with his uncle and building websites at night for local businesses. He had earned every cent he had. When he met Celeste at a charity event, he didn't know who she was. He saw a woman in the corner of the room, scribbling poems on napkins and avoiding eye contact with anyone too loud. She laughed nervously when he asked her name. "You wouldn't know me," she said with a smile. "I'm not the one people remember." But he did. They spoke for hours that night about books and quiet spaces, and why she hated wearing heels. Daniel saw something in Celeste no one else ever bothered to look for: depth. They started meeting in small cafes instead of ballrooms. She took him to old bookstores instead of yacht clubs. She told him stories no one else had heard about how she used to climb out her bedroom window just to watch the stars without being judged. About the time she painted her entire bathroom ceiling just to feel like she had control over something. He fell in love with her slowly, then all at once. When Daniel asked her to marry him, the room froze. Her father scoffed, her sisters smirked, and the tabloids chewed on it like hungry wolves. "Langford's least wanted finds a husband," one headline read, but Celeste didn't care. For once, she felt seen. The wedding was quiet. No helicopter entrance, no fireworks. Just vows under a tree in a garden that smelled like spring. But what Daniel didn't know, what Celeste hadn't told him, was that she was hiding something. Something that could change everything. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a secret child or a stolen fortune. It was a truth about her family, about the Langfords, and why she had always been kept in the shadows. On their wedding night, after the guests had gone and the candles had burned low, Celeste sat beside him on the bed, her hands trembling. "I need to tell you something," she whispered. Daniel looked at her with soft curiosity, not alarm. "Whatever it is," he said gently, "just say it. I married you, Celeste, not your past." She exhaled, her eyes glimmering with something between fear and freedom. "There's something you don't know about my father, about my family." Her voice wavered. "You've probably always wondered why I was never really part of their world." Daniel reached for her hand and held it. "I never cared why." "I know," she said, smiling weakly. "But it's time I told someone." Celeste stood and walked to the old wooden chest at the foot of the bed, opening it slowly. Inside were stacks of papers, journals, and a thick leather folder. She pulled it out, placed it on the bed, and opened it to reveal rows of documents, emails, bank records, and photos. Daniel scanned the top page: offshore accounts, property deeds, names he didn't recognize, and a few he did, famous ones. "My father," she began, "he's not just a businessman. He's part of something darker. He made his empire through people he never wants to talk about. Silent partners, political deals, exploiting land and labor in ways even the press hasn't uncovered yet. And she swallowed, I found all this when I was 16. Daniel blinked, stunned. I tried to confront him. I asked questions. He told me to stay in my place, that I didn't have the strength to carry the Langford name. That's when he cut me out quietly. He didn't disown me publicly, but he stripped me of any stake. He left me the name, the room in the house, the allowance. But I was a ghost. I was his biggest threat, Daniel, not because I was powerful, but because I knew the truth. She looked at him then, bracing for change in his eyes, but what she saw wasn't fear or judgment. It was awe. You carried that all alone? He said softly. She nodded. I never told anyone. If I had, I would have been erased, Daniel. Truly erased. I stayed silent. I let them humiliate me. Let them treat me like I didn't belong. Because I needed to be close enough to protect this. She tapped the folder. Daniel opened the next page. Photos of warehouses overseas, ledgers, detailing under-the-table payments, and letters signed by officials. He looked up, breathless. This could destroy them. She nodded again. I didn't know if I ever wanted to. They're still my family, even if they never treated me like theirs. But now, I'm married, and I don't want to live with secrets between us. There was silence between them for a long time. Then Daniel reached over and closed the folder. Then we do this together. On our terms, when you're ready. Tears welled in her eyes. You don't think I'm a coward? I think you're the bravest person I've ever met. From that night forward, something shifted. Celeste, who had always walked through life with her shoulders curled in, began to stand taller. She didn't hide behind neutral dresses or apologize when she spoke. Daniel's belief in her was like oxygen. It filled all the empty places that years of dismissal had carved into her. Together, they made a plan. Daniel had friends in ethical law firms, journalists who still believed in truth, and experts in digital security. Celeste, with her documentation and her memory sharper than a blade, began organizing what would soon become one of the largest whistleblower cases in the country. But it wasn't about revenge. I'm not doing this to punish them, she told Daniel. I'm doing it to set myself free. As the months passed, Celeste transformed not into someone new, but into the woman she was always meant to be. With Daniel by her side, she no longer walked like someone trying to disappear. She entered rooms with quiet grace, no longer shrinking beneath her sister's presence or her father's shadow. The folder that once haunted her now rested locked in a fireproof cabinet, protected by legal hands and ethical journalists who understood the weight of truth. They worked in silence, strategically. There were legal risks, emotional risks. The documents Celeste had collected proved decades of tax evasion, exploitation, and off-the-record lobbying that spanned continents. Yet she insisted they move slowly, not for fear, but for precision. I don't want to hurt people who don't deserve it, she said. But I won't protect evil with my silence anymore. Daniel watched her speak to lawyers, to reporters, to women who had once been intimidated by her father's power. She never raised her voice, but her presence grew heavier, stronger. Word began to spread not in headlines yet, but in whispers. Through elite circles, Celeste Langford is up to something. Her sisters Isla and Vivian began reaching out. At first it was under the guise of politeness. Let's have lunch. Just checking in, but Celeste saw the fear behind. Their sudden attention. Neither had ever invited her to anything before. Now they were remembering they had a third sister. Then one evening, her father called. Daniel saw her hesitate before answering. Her hands trembled slightly, but her face remained composed. Hello, Father, she said. His voice came through cold and precise. I hear you're making noise, Celeste. I'm telling the truth. You think the truth will save you? No, she replied. I don't need saving anymore. There was silence on the line. Then, like he was still testing the leash he thought he held, he said, You've always been the disappointment. She smiled, not bitterly, but with a strange calm. That's funny. I used to think the same about you. She hung up. Daniel stood nearby, watching her, and felt something shift. Not just in their lives, but in history. For so long, people like her father had ruled behind closed doors. And now, someone who had once been too invisible to be seen was finally holding them accountable. The next week, an expose broke in a major financial paper. The headline didn't mention Celeste by name, but those who knew. Investors began pulling out. Politicians issued denials. And Bernard Langford's empire, once untouchable, began to crack. Celeste didn't celebrate. Instead, she and Daniel took a few days to retreat into the quiet. They stayed at a small cottage near the coast. No signal, no reporters. Just crashing waves and cool morning fog. She painted. He read. They cooked barefoot, drank coffee on the porch, and reminded each other that their love had nothing to do with the world outside. One night, while they sat watching the moonlight dance on the water, Daniel looked at her and said, "You know, the girl I met at that charity event, that girl who sat in the corner and wrote poems on napkins, I still see her. She's just not hiding anymore." Celeste turned to him, eyes glistening. "You didn't marry the unwanted daughter of a billionaire, Daniel. You married a woman who finally remembered she was never unwanted at all." In the months that followed, the Langford name was no longer associated with power and prestige. It was tangled in lawsuits, investigations, and broken alliances. Bernard Langford himself stepped down from several boards, his public image collapsing under the weight of secrets that had been buried for decades. But even as the world finally saw what Celeste had known all along, she remained quiet, dignified, and for the first time in her life free. Celeste and Daniel never sought fame. They declined interviews, refused to write books or sign film deals, and moved to a quieter city by the lake, where life moved slowly and hearts healed faster. They opened a foundation, not in her father's name, but in her mother's. Celeste's mother had passed when she was only 12, and it was only in adulthood that Celeste realized how often her mother, too, had been silenced. The Marian Grace Foundation helped young women from powerful families escape abuse, neglect, and the crushing expectations of perfection. It wasn't just charity, it was justice through compassion. Celeste began teaching creative writing at a local college, her passion for words reignited in a classroom full of quiet minds like hers once was. She encouraged her students to tell the stories they were afraid to write. "Truth," she would tell them, "is rarely loud, but it always echoes." Daniel continued working in sustainable design, spending his evenings sketching homes that felt like safe spaces because he had built one with her. Their days were filled with simplicity: morning walks, garden coffee, Sunday dinners with neighbors who didn't care about their pasts. One spring morning, as they walked hand in hand through the wildflowers behind their home, Daniel turned to her and asked, "Do you ever miss any of it? The noise? The legacy?" Celeste thought for a moment, then smiled. "No, I don't miss being overlooked. I don't miss hiding. I don't miss wondering if I mattered." She stopped, picking a single daisy and tucking it behind his ear playfully. "But I do miss who I used to pretend to be, because she taught me how to become the woman I am now." And he looked at her, as if seeing her again for the very first time. The unwanted daughter of a billionaire no longer carried that title. She was Celeste's teacher, truth-teller, survivor, builder of a better world. She had married a man who saw her, truly saw her, and through his love and her courage, she reclaimed her story. She didn't burn bridges. She simply walked past them and chose never to return. The world would always remember the Langfords for what they built and destroyed. But Daniel would always remember Celeste for what she saved, herself. And in the quiet of that life they made together, they finally understood something powerful, that love isn't loud. It's steady, it's brave, and sometimes it's the quiet truth that changes everything.